Isaac Private Eye. This book was created especially for Isaac Michael Helgens as a gift for his 6th birthday, April 30th, 1986. The story was written by his grandmother, Sharon Helgens. The illustrations were drawn by his father, Dean Michael Helgens. Isaac was bored. He sat on the trailer steps, elbows digging into his knees, his chin sunk in his hands. An awful scowl twisted his face. Sighing, he stood up and went inside. His mother was folding the laundry. She glanced up. "What have you been doing?" "Nothing. I never have anything to do. Will you read to me?" "I'm sorry, honey, I don't have time." She sorted the clothes into piles. "I've got to feed Jade and get her to sleep." Isaac's shoulders drooped. His mother never had time anymore. She was always doing housework or taking care of his little sister. "Why don't you play pirate?" she suggested. "You always have fun doing that." Angry, Isaac stomped into his room. "All right, I'll play pirate. I'll be a really mean pirate." He found his plastic sword and the black eye patch he'd worn for Halloween. As soon as he pulled the eye patch over his head and it settled in its place, Isaac imagined himself growing. Soon he was the biggest, toughest, meanest pirate that ever sailed the seas. With a fierce roar, Isaac, the pirate, led his ragged crew over the sides of a handsome sailing ship. Swords flashed. Women and children screamed in fear. The battle ended quickly. A long string of prisoners lined up, eager to walk the plank, rather than face Isaac, the pirate's sword. He laughed when he saw sharks circling the ship. But long before he had forced all the prisoners aboard, he was tired of the game. In fact, Isaac was just plain tired of playing. He wanted to do something real, something important. But he was just a kid. Only grown-ups did important things. He lowered his sword and yanked off the eye patch, throwing them into the toy box. He went looking for his mother. He found her settling Jabe in his crib, and he started to say, "Mom, can you—" His mother held a finger to her lips and motioned him from the room. "Mom, can we do something now?" Ruffling his hair, she answered, "I've got to start dinner. Sorry." She turned the dial on the kitchen stove, and blue flames leapt high. She adjusted the knob, and the fire grew smaller. As Isaac stared at it, his imagination began painting pictures again. Soon the flame jumped up and bit into the nearby curtain, quickly eating the entire thing. Then they soon hopped to the table, gobbling up the tablecloth and napkins. Soon the greedy orange flames crackled everywhere. Black smoke filled the room, and his mother and sister screamed in fear. "Help!" his mother cried. "Help! Save us!" Isaac was dressed like a fireman, in a yellow slicker, high black boots, and a funny-looking hat. "I'll save you!" he yelled. Running to his sister's room, he scooped her up from the crib and then rushed to the kitchen. Flinging his mother over his shoulder, he fought his way out of the burning trailer. Together, they watched the angry flames destroy their home. His mother turned to him. "Oh, Isaac, you saved our lives. You must be the bravest boy in the whole world." Isaac stood tall and proud, listening to his mother's words of praise. Her voice droned on and on. Finally, Isaac became aware of what she was. "Honestly, Isaac, you must be the whole world. I've called you 3 times now. Don't you want any dinner?" Isaac looked around. The kitchen was just the same as always. He hadn't saved his mother and sister's lives. He was just a kid, and kids never did anything important. After dinner, Isaac's mother had to wash dishes. Soon his little sister would be awake again, and his mother would still be busy. Scowling, he shoved his hands deep into his pockets. He'd go visit his friend, Mrs. Sugar, and play with her cat, Misty. Isaac kicked at stones and dragged his feet until the toes of his white sneakers were covered with dust. Mr. Sugar, dressed in old clothes, was in the garage, loading up a fishing pole and tackle box into his Jeep. He saw Isaac and waved. "Hi, how you doing today?" "I'm bored," Isaac answered, frowning. "Well, why don't you go in the house? My wife has just the thing to make you feel better." Isaac rang the doorbell. Mrs. Shover smiled when she saw who was there. "Isaac, how nice to see you. John was just going fishing. Now I'll have someone to keep me company. Come in." When she opened the door, her cat Misty scampered through and into the garage, where she hopped into the Jeep. Mr. Shover lifted her out. Before he could close the door, Misty jumped into the Jeep again. Mr. Shover called, "Isaac, would you get Misty and take her inside?" "Sure," Isaac answered. He ran it to the garage. Misty sat in the Jeep with her paws hooked over the rim of an old bucket, staring into it without blinking. Curious, Isaac looked too. Dozens of tiny silver fishes darted back and forth in the shallow waters. Mr. Shover laughed. "Looks like Misty wants to fish too." "What are they?" Isaac asked. "Minnows," Mr. Shover said. "I'm going to use them for bait." "Oh." Isaac reached for Misty. He carried her into the kitchen. Mrs. Shover was pouring 2 glasses of milk. "I baked cookies this morning," she said, "just in case I had company. Now I'm so glad I did." Isaac sat down and Mrs. Shover passed the cookies. He took one and bit into it. The sweet, buttery flavor filled his mouth, and he grinned. "Now," she said, "tell me what you've been doing with yourself." Before he could answer, Mr. Shover opened the door. "I forgot my hat," he said. Mrs. Shover found the hat on the chair and handed it to him. "Here it is. Now please, close the door before the flies find their way into my kitchen." Winking at Isaac, Mr. Shover plunked the old, shapeless hat on his head. "Now I'm ready to go fishing." He smiled and waved goodbye. Isaac visited with his friend and then asked if he could play with Misty. "Of course," Mrs. Shover said. "I'm surprised she isn't sitting on your lap now. I wonder where she is." They both called, but Misty never came. "That's funny," Mrs. Shover said. "Maybe she's outside. You brought her in, didn't you?" "Yes," Isaac nodded. "Well, I know how to bring her out of hiding," Mrs. Shover said. "Misty always comes running when she hears the can opener." She took a can from the cupboard and removed the lid. Scooping the strong-smelling mixture into Misty's dish, she set it on the floor. The cat did not come. "I don't believe it," Mrs. Shover cried. "Misty loves this fish flavor better than any cat food. I swear she can smell a fish a mile away." Worry lines creased her forehead. She must have gotten outside. But how? When? "Maybe when Mr. Shover came in for his hat," Isaac said. "Of course," she said, smiling. "Why didn't I think of that?" Isaac followed Mrs. Shover outside. They searched the garage and the entire yard, calling Misty's name and peering into every tree. Mrs. Shover was very upset. "Oh, Isaac, what could have happened to her? I hope she didn't get hit by a car." Feeling sorry for his friend, Isaac said, "Don't worry, I'll find Misty for you. I'm good at finding things." "Do you think you could?" she asked. "Oh, my dear, I would be so grateful." "Sure I can," Isaac promised. Mrs. Shover turned away. "I'll check the road, just in case." Isaac wanted to help his friend more than anything in the world. She was counting on him. He couldn't let her down. He thought about a detective he'd seen on television. How would a private eye find a missing cat? By finding clues, of course. Closing his eyes, Isaac pictured himself dressed up in a trench coat, his hat pulled down low. He would take a magnifying glass out of his pocket and his eyes flew open. No pretending this time. This was no game. This was his chance to do something real, something important. He closed his eyes again. Only this time he thought hard. What would I do if I were a cat? He asked himself. Catch mice, of course, but where? He wondered. Suddenly he cried, "The horse barn!" Whirling, Isaac ran toward the old building. He opened the heavy door and stepped inside. It was dark and smelled of horses and musty straw. Loudly he called, "Kitty, kitty, kitty!" Swallows fluttered up into the rafters. The horses turned in their snarls and snorted, nervously stamping their feet. Misty wasn't there. Disappointed, he headed back to Mrs. Shover. Isaac's mind scrambled for clues. Cats like to chase birds, but they had searched all the trees and bushes around. Let's see, what else did cats like? They like fish, he thought. Suddenly he stood perfectly still. His eyes sparkled with excitement, and a grin spread across his face. "That's it!" he yelled. Running, he called to Mrs. Shover, who was trudging towards the house, her face tightened by sadness. "Mrs. Shover! Mrs. Shover! I think I know where Misty is." She turned to him, hope shining in her eyes. Tugging at her hand, he pulled her toward the garage. "Do you know where Mr. Shover went fishing?" he asked. Trying to keep up with him, she answered, "Well, yes, I do." "Can you drive us there?" "What's that got to do with Misty? I thought you said you knew where she was." "I think I do," Isaac said, "but I'll need your help. Can you drive us there, please?" Looking bewildered, Mrs. Shover said, "You're not playing games, are you?" "Oh, no, this is no game," he said, trying to make her understand. "This is real. This is important." He looked up at her, his dark brown eyes filling with tears. He waited for her to see how much he wanted to help her. He wanted her to know that she was his special friend. "Please," said Mrs. Shover must have understood, for suddenly she said, "All right, let's go." The car bounced over the gravel roads, then turned onto a dirt path that wound down to a river's edge. They found Mr. Shover's Jeep and parked behind it. Mr. Shover was sitting on a large red and white cooler. He turned to look over his shoulder at them. "Well, what are you two up to?" "Oh, John," Mrs. Shover cried, "Misty's gone. Isaac and I have simply looked everywhere." "Well, you've finally looked in the right place," he said, pointing. Isaac and Mrs. Shover came closer. There sat Misty on her hind legs, paws balanced over on the old bucket. As they watched, she reached out a paw and scooped up a minnow. "I found her in the Jeep when I got here," Mr. Shover said. "She wanted to fish, too." Mrs. Shover picked up the cat in her arms. Looking into Misty's speckled eyes, she scolded, "Naughty girl! You frightened me!" She hugged her, then turned to Isaac. "My dear young friend, you are a marvel. You must be the most clever boy in the whole world." "Yo, easy," Isaac said. "I used my head and thought of clues. I told you I was good at finding things." "A real private detective," Mr. Shover said. The next day, Mrs. Shover called and asked Isaac to visit her. When he arrived, she invited him in for a treat. Before he left, Mrs. Shover handed him a bundle wrapped with white tissue paper decorated with a bright red bow. Isaac looked at her, his eyes round with surprise. "It's a special present from my very special friend," she told him. "Go on, open it." Isaac untied the bow and tore off the paper. Inside he found a blue t-shirt with white letters on it. He was just beginning to read, so he couldn't figure out the whole message. He could read his own name, that was easy, but he stumbled over the next word. Smiling, Mrs. Shover pointed to each word and read, "Isaac, private eye." "Is that what it says?" Isaac asked. "Wow, thanks." "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for helping me find Misty, and thank you for being such a good friend." Isaac could hardly wait to show his mother and father. They had been very proud of him for what he had done. Isaac was proud of himself, too. At last, he had done something important. The end.